Good evening, all. My name is Theodore Katspadelis. I supposed to be the chairperson of this session. We had some new technologies to apply in order to begin the whole thing. I suppose you see everybody is seeing the screen and the room here, and we have four, as I said, hello, you see the screen and you're here, okay? So we have, as I said, four papers. The one is from Stefan Constantin Radu, the influence of environmental taxes on the population's exposure to pollution in Bulgaria, Cyprus, Greece, and Romania. Very interesting. The second one is by Kleoniki Kalapouti and Nikos Varsakelis, the role of universities on regional innovation, does quality matter? Then it is a paper from me about COVID, a methodological model for the analysis of government preventive measures and health data records. And we will conclude with Alexandra Harrington, governance gaps in environmental protection for Black Sea and Eastern Mediterranean region. So let's begin with Stefan Constantin. Let's say something like 15 minutes. I think it's quite enough. It's enough, but anyway, something like 15 to 20 minutes, let me say.
I think I can manage it.
Inform you that it is the session is recorded. I suppose nobody has a problem about it, but for typical reasons, we should ask if somebody has a problem with recording. So, Stefan Constantin, you may begin.
Thank you.
You can. I suppose you can share your screen. Check.
You can now see my presentation, yes?
Yeah, we don't hear you.
Can you now hear me?
Stefan, we can't hear you.
Okay. Now, can you hear me?
It's impossible to hear you. I don't know.
You can now hear me because it seems that I changed the settings.
You can hear us? So
yes, yes, I can hear you.
Can you share your screen, your presentation?
Yes.
We have a presentation.
Yes. You can see now my presentation. Can you hear me? Hello. Can you hear me?
Sorry. Okay, this is it.
Yes, you can hear me, yes? Please confirm if you can hear me, because I'm going to start the presentation. My presentation is based on the...
Okay, now it's okay.
It's okay, yes? It's okay?
Yes, it's okay.
Okay, sorry.
Again.
Sorry for the problems.
No, it isn't your problem. I mean, it is a new platform, is hoping something, and anyway, we will.
Okay,
We'll
I'll start now. I want to say I'm very thankful, and I want to thank the University of Nicosia for organizing the conference, and it's an honor for me to participate. And it takes me great pleasure to present a piece of research which I consider of interest. And if there are any questions or the paper is interesting and people want to know more about it, they can ask and I'll gladly answer. The paper is entitled The Influence on Environmental Taxes on the Population's Exposure to Pollution in Bulgaria, Cyprus, Greece, and Romania. I consider this to be of interest due to the fact that in the last decades, the protection of the environment has been one of the main concerns of the European Union and of all the civilized world due to its potential catastrophic consequences. Considering also the latest developments, such as the new Green Deal, which will almost certainly change the landscape of industrial countries and will bring about a very big provocation if we are able to adopt the new technologies and adapt to the changing world as economies. I was interested in finding out if the current taxes, environmental taxes, have an effect, a quantitative effect on pollution, on the population's exposure to pollution in Bulgaria, Cyprus, Greece, and Romania. I chose these countries because I consider them to be in scope of the conference. They are part of the Black Sea and of the Eastern Mediterranean region. And also, I think they are Bulgaria and Romania are interesting for the fact that they are new member states of the European Union, both being members since 2007. And Cyprus and Greece are interesting also due to their profile as countries that are based on on a less of a polluting industrial nation. They don't have that much level of pollution. So I think that that's interesting, even due to the fact that we suppose that an environmental tax would have an effect on a country which is which has a high degree of pollution. But as we'll see from this paper, it has an effect even on countries that have a small degree of pollution. From the literature review, I selected 4 papers, which I consider the most representative for the methodology and the discussion. The paper by Chien from 2021, which sets up a guideline in reducing air pollution and also exemplifies the use of environmental taxes, of regional environmental taxes, as a way of reducing pollution. The other paper is the one written by Tsibulka, which is called Reducing Air Pollution. Are environmental taxes enough to help the EU member states reach climate neutrality? Which shares interesting insights about the way in which environmental taxes work and their usefulness. And the last 2 papers, the one by Dahlberg and Johansson and the one by Andrews and Liu, are papers that deal with econometrics, with the panel VAR methodology, which is the one that I used to analyze the relation between environmental taxes and the population's exposure to pollution. The methodology, as I said, is the panel VAR methodology. And I implemented the model for Greece, Bulgaria, Romania, and Cyprus. The panel var methodology is interesting because it allows us to use the advantages of the vector autoregressive model, which means we can use the data from previous years, but also the panel data, which allows us to analyze multiple countries at the same time. The effect of the environmental tax was the tax was measured by total environmental taxes dataset, which was provided by Eurostat, and the air pollution was measured by urban population exposure to air pollution by particle matter. The results presented are for the period between 2011 and 2019, and I used logarithmic differences for the period because I wanted to see if the acceleration, the growth, the growth of the pollution is influenced by the growth of the taxes and how the relation works. Here I presented the results. I used 4 lags. I wanted to see the results for 4 years in advance. And we can see that for the first lag of environmental tax, the air pollution is decreased by 16%. So the environmental tax has an effect of decreasing the amount of particles of air pollution which are in the air in the certain country. This means that the results are consistent for all the countries, for all the 4 countries. The tests are valid and the roots of the polynomial are inside the unit circle. And this means that we can obtain significant results and consistent results for all the 4 countries. So we can say that environmental taxes that are paid in the last year are the most significant for reducing the air pollution in the current year due to the fact that the coefficient is negative. The results indicate that increasing the revenues from environmental taxes will lead to the reduction of the exposure to air pollution in the case of all the countries, Bulgaria, Cyprus, Greece, and Romania. And I think this is of interest due to the idea that, according to the Green Deal, we should become carbon neutral until 2050. So these ideas are of interest, and we can use these means by increasing the environmental taxes in order to reduce pollution and determine a change without doing very much, just increasing the taxes on polluting companies. This was my presentation. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you, Stefan. Quite interesting. And I suppose we can let's try to uh, if there are any questions, we can keep it to the end. So let's continue with Leoniki Kalaputi. Do you hear us, Leoniki? Leoniki? Leoniki, do you hear us? So maybe, Leoniki, could you share your screen? I don't know if there is. Leoniki, please, if you hear us, can you say something? I don't know, maybe she looked, Okay, can you, Leoniki, can you share your screen? We didn't see you. Can you? Okay, let's continue with Alexandra Harrington, and we will see what's going on, if it's possible.
Can you hear in the room? Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm hearing you, but
Excellent.
can you share your screen?
Yes, actually, I don't have a PowerPoint presentation.
Okay.
Since I thought that I would
It
be
doesn't
close
matter.
since I thought I would be close to the end, I thought everyone might be tired of PowerPoint, so I would just speak.
Okay.
So you'll just kind of have the lovely background of Northern England where it's actually sunny. So thank you. First of all, thank you all for organizing this. I do apologize not to be able to be there in person, but do hope to be at some point in the future. So as the title of my presentation suggests, this will look at the idea of governance gaps in how we protect the environment in both the Black Sea and the Eastern Mediterranean. And it builds on a larger article, the presentation, discussing this and looking at essentially how there are a number of different types of governance regimes, be they what we would call hard law in legal studies, so binding and typically convention or treaty-based. So soft law, which is more persuasive, which is less required, but often much more powerful in many ways and much more amenable to change as the needs change in an area or a topic. And the idea of this presentation and research is really to see where the gaps are, where the overlaps are between what we already have for the Black Sea and the Eastern Mediterranean, and how these can be bridged or fused together so that we might be able to have one very concrete system for addressing the environmental needs of these two regions, which are together and also separately so very critical as environmental preserves, as preserves for biological diversity. And as we see in quite recent times, especially given the military hostilities in Ukraine as well, and the use of various coastlines as target points for military activities, we also see that the environmental threat is taking on a new dimension. It's no longer just climate change. It's very much now also man-made interactions. So this is another kind of background reason for why we really do need to address the governance gaps. And when we look at the various regions, we do rather have to break up the existing governance structures between those that look solely at the Black Sea, those that look solely at the Mediterranean and include the Eastern Mediterranean region, and then those that are truly overlapping. And what's fascinating and also quite problematic from a really holistic governance system perspective and point of view is that we have various states with coastal areas and territorial jurisdiction over waters in the Black Sea and the Eastern Mediterranean that are part of some of these, but not all of them, to the point where we really don't have one overarching governance regime from a legal perspective or from a regulatory perspective that will allow us to have parity in terms of what are we talking about for environmental protection, for protection of biodiversity, protection of natural resources and species, etc. So if we look first to what exists for the Black Sea, we know that perhaps the most obvious of the treaty regimes in this discussion is the Bucharest Convention for the Protection of the Black Sea Against Pollution, which was adopted in 1992. which features Ukraine, the Russian Federation, Turkey, Bulgaria, Georgia, and Romania as member states. And although it has been in place since 1992, it should be pointed out that as late as 2019, so right before the pandemic began, the Commission on the implementation of the convention itself highlighted that the Black Sea is, and I quote, a sea in trouble, and that this means it is environmentally quite endangered. And any alteration, any change at that time in 2019 in the environmental characteristics and stresses upon the Black Sea was deemed to be potentially triggering of a catastrophic impact on the environment. We know that climate change impacts have continued since 2019. We know that certainly military activities do have a great deal of impact on environmental activities as well, and environmental status as well. So certainly when we're thinking about the convention, it is quite important, but it also does have a limited scope of application, or at least accomplishment to date, when we're looking at the very practical realities that exist 20 plus years later after its adoption, almost 30 years actually after its adoption. The convention itself, because I realize we have a wonderful interdisciplinary audience, so just to give a bit of a background, the convention itself is a legally binding convention on the states that I mentioned. And it is created with the idea that the Black Sea serves a very essential economic and also environmental and social and health benefit to all the states that border it. So every state has equal sovereignty over their territorial boundaries on the Black Sea, and they're all intended to work together and not to interfere with each other in terms of how there are regulations for potential transboundary harm, etc. There is one notable exception to the terms which comes in Article 4, which relates to military activities, and which does actually exempt, at this particular moment, all of a member state's military activities, so warships, naval ships, etc., from the parameters of the Bucharest Convention. And that is something that's very important to bear in mind as we do see current upticks in conflict in the region and potential conflict in the region. What the convention does is establish the idea of preventing pollution as critical. It identifies methods of pollution that are very well known and have caused a great deal of issues so far, such as the dumping of hazardous matter, both from vessels and from sea-based operations, as well as land-based sources, and through the atmosphere in general. And there is a particular effort in the Bucharest Convention to address ideas of transboundary movement of pollution, which work quite well, as we'll speak about in a moment, with some of the other ideas of transboundary harm and environmental impact assessment. But again, need to be remembered in the sense that while some of the Black Sea states may be part of these other conventions, they are not all part of these conventions, and that while they do dovetail quite well, when all states are not members of them, it does create a big gap. The other areas of focus of the Bucharest Convention itself look at scientific and technical cooperation and monitoring requirements, as well as responsibility and liability for state parties if there is a spill, if there is some other type of pollution, especially where there isn't notification of surrounding member states. And we've seen from 1992 onwards a steady amplification of what is in the terms of the Bucharest Convention under a series of protocols that have been adopted and that relate to oil and other harmful substances being general pollutants and also pollutants in emergency situations, land-based sources of pollution, etc. There is actually a protocol on biodiversity and the need to prevent any type of damage and preserve the biodiversity in the Black Sea region. That is not in force at the moment. It was adopted in 2002, but it's not legally in force. If it were to come in force, however, it would become very significant in kind of leveling many of the governance gaps that do currently exist. Looking beyond this convention itself, we also should point out that there are two notable members of the Black Sea States group, Bulgaria and Romania, who are members of the European Union, and thus they are bound by aspects of European Union law that include things like the EU Common Implementation Strategy for environmental concerns, as was mentioned previously, the European Union's new Green Deal from 2019, the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, and the Marine Spatial Planning Directives, all of which place very heightened requirements on member states, and all of which require member states that share borders and boundaries on especially marine and maritime resources to try to get states that are not members of the EU to comply and to act in accordance with these standards, although this obviously is not a legal requirement for states who are not members of the EU. So there is a bit of an uncertainty and a gap there. When we look at the Eastern Mediterranean, we see that there are a number of crossover states with the Black Sea. We have Bulgaria, Romania. We also have obviously the EU states, a great number of EU states that border on the Eastern Mediterranean. They are typically subject to the Barcelona Convention, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, which does include things like general obligations, such as the precautionary principle and the polluter pays principle and environmental impact assessment, as well as the idea of monitoring and reporting transboundary pollution. But again, this is only some of the shared states within the region, not all of them. And again, the Barcelona Convention uses a series of protocols to really express the emergence of a number of different issues from the 1970s onward in terms of how they have played a role in the environmental concerns and environmental status of the Mediterranean region. In addition, we also have a number of multilateral international conventions that some states have ratified, that others have not, but that do at least have a potential to assist in curing some of the governance gaps if they were to be uniformly adopted, which to date they are not. The first comes from the Espoo Convention regime. The Espoo Convention itself from 1991 is a convention on environmental impact assessments in the transboundary context, and especially notable that many of the European states have adopted this, as have the Russian Federation and Ukraine. They have both ratified this. And this does create a significant apparatus that requires domestic and international application of environmental impact assessments that would say when a project or a proposed activity would be such that it could cause significant environmental damage to either the entire region of the Black Sea and or the Eastern Mediterranean, or vice versa, as well as to those neighboring states that do share maritime borders with other states. And this is supplemented by the Espoo Protocol on Strategic Environmental Assessment. Thus far, of the Black Sea states, Ukraine has signed and ratified, and that is the only state that has done so. However, this is significantly viewed by largely the rest of the European and some associated state communities as being very important for addressing environmental impact and biodiversity needs, particularly because it looks at maritime proposals and projects in conjunction with impacts from land-based sources of pollution, such as forestry or agriculture, or waste management. So it really is much more holistic. But again, we do have this gap. And additionally, we also have the Aarhus Convention, which relates to access to information, public participation in decision-making, and access to justice in environmental matters. This may actually be arguably the most uniformly accepted amongst the Black Sea and Eastern Mediterranean states in terms of jurisdiction, in terms of states who are both signatories and have also ratified it. However, while many of these states do have this as part of their binding national now, as well as international legal commitments, it still does not represent the entirety of the region. And while this can be very powerful, especially for ensuring that the public does have a say in what is going on with such very critical international and transboundary sources of environmental benefit as well as biodiversity protection and ecosystems, it really is something that needs to be further entrenched across the entirety of the systems. Finally, as I mentioned earlier, we do have a number of states, especially within the Eastern Mediterranean region, who are members of the European Union, who will be bound by the European Green Deal, certainly, the other directives that I mentioned, and also the climate law, which was adopted in 2021, and which really does place a great deal of requirement and burden upon member states in terms of ensuring their maritime as well as terrestrial and land-based environmental protections are in place, including things like environmental impact assessments and the like. So what we see overall is, in many ways, excellent pieces of efforts to regulate and to govern shared waterways, and waterways that are often quite difficult to share because they are in many ways valuable and play a significant cultural function as well as a significant international function and national function. But what we don't see, and what certainly the article that this presentation is based on argues, was that we don't see a real effort to try to bridge all of these gaps. And certainly some of this is political, and necessarily so. But what we don't see is a real effort to bridge these gaps and to create one uniform system that would provide us with a place for the generation of laws and policies that would protect the environment and allow the region to grow. And that would also allow us to have something like a much more uniform complaints mechanism, review mechanism, and also dispute settlement mechanism were that to be necessary. And certainly some of the entities like the ESPU and Aarhus conventions have very significant forms of dispute settlement, whereas others do not. And again, this does leave a very strong gap in how we can have a uniform understanding of environmental protection for areas that are so very much in need. So I don't want to take any more time in the discussion. I think that's just about 15 minutes. And I'm happy to yield the floor. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Alexandra. It is interesting how all this pollution would be. Anyway, we will continue with Kleoniki. Do you hear us, Kleoniki?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Can you share your screen if you have a presentation? Do you have a presentation?
Yes, of course.
Okay. Try to share your screen probably.
Can you see my presentation?
I don't know.
Can you see my presentation?
Yes, now we can see your presentation. Here it is.
Okay.
Yes, okay.
Okay.
I'm
Shall I
sorry, but
start? Yes.
we had, it is a new platform and we are not so familiar with it. I mean, this hopping.
Okay, yes, I understand.
Probably it is good, but I don't know. We don't have any, we don't know a lot of it, and so I'm sorry that we have some technical issues, but we can continue now.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay. So I am Kleoniki Kalaputi, and I am a postdoc researcher in Economics Department of Aristoteles University of Thessaloniki. Professor Varsakelis and I carry out this research financed by the State Scholarships Foundation. So our research motivation deals with technological varieties and universities' quality level, which both determine innovation proxied by new knowledge production. The first hypothesis states that the related and unrelated variety of European regions' innovative activity affect their knowledge production. Related variety refers to the variety of industries that are cognitively related So we can talk about technological variety occurring within a sector, and unrelated variety refers to technological diversification unrelated to existing technologies. So we can talk about technological variety occurring between sectors, different sectors. The second hypothesis is threefold. So firstly, we can state that good universities or high-quality universities contribute to the creation of new knowledge in the European regions. Then we can state that good universities affect the role of unrelated variety and related variety to the creation of new knowledge in the European regions. In order to test these two hypotheses, we structure a synergetic term between unrelated variety and university's quality level, and related variety with university's quality level. So, in order to test the first hypothesis relative to technological varieties, a Steinon's entropy index was constructed in order to measure the industrial or sectoral diversification. Therefore, unrelated variety is the entropy at two-digit technological sectors, and related variety is the weighted sum of entropies within each two-digit technological sector. The sum of unrelated variety and related variety gives us the total entropy index. Regarding the second hypothesis, a university quality level variable was constructed. This is a categorical variable and takes values from 1 to 5 for those regions that have none good university, 1 good university, 2 good universities, 3 good universities, 4 or more world-class universities correspondingly. The appropriate data for this variable were extracted from the academic ranking of world universities list, where a university ranking takes place according to various criteria like quality of education, quality of faculty, research output, and per capita performance. Regarding the first hypothesis, our data set consists of 209 European regions producing patent applications across 121 three-digit technological sectors, which are grouped into 27 two-digit technological sectors, covering the time span from 1995 to 2012. In order to test the second hypothesis, the time span is limited to 10 years, beginning from 2003 to 2012, due to universities' quality level data restricted availability. Therefore, we estimate a Cobb-Douglas type knowledge production function with panel data methodology. Our results prove that both unrelated variety and related variety are positively correlated with new knowledge production. However, the impact of unrelated variety on new knowledge creation is stronger than that of the related variety. Regarding the second hypothesis, our findings indicate that university quality has a positive impact on regional innovative activity, and university's quality is related to the productivity improvement of regional researchers. Now, regarding the interaction term between unrelated variety and university's quality level, our findings prove that the simultaneous consideration of world-class university reduces the impact of unrelated variety on knowledge creation and vice versa. This means that if the number of good universities increases, the effect of unrelated variety on knowledge creation falls. So we can state that the impact of a good university in a region reduces the need for knowledge transfer between the two-digit sectors. Alternatively, when a region presents high unrelated variety, the impact of good universities on knowledge creation declines. So we can say that the existence of many industries with low cognitive or technological proximity reduces the need for taking knowledge from universities, because these industries produce and diffuse knowledge to each other. Finally, regarding the interaction term between related variety and university's quality level, our findings indicate that the simultaneous consideration of world-class university increases the impact of the related variety on new knowledge creation and vice versa. So we can state that an increase of the related variety innovation at three-digit sectors, which is more specialized in specific product and technological characteristics, produces original knowledge, and therefore the need for universities' basic research is high. This is my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, thank you, Clonik. It is really interesting, although it is different than the pollution and the papers we hear before yours. So let's have a 5 minutes break, and we will continue. I don't know if you can send the question through chat or whatever. I suppose if somebody has a question, he or she can send it through chat probably. I really don't know anything about this new platform. So let's have a 5 minutes break. It is 6 o'clock, let's say, Greek time. So about in 5 minutes we will continue. I suppose you see my screen now, isn't it?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, I tried to do anyway. I'm really sorry. I don't know anything about this copying platform, but anyway, we will manage to do it. I'm really sorry if there are any problems with it. So let me say a few words about COVID and a model about see the effect on countries and people across the globe. There is the question if this situation, COVID, would be a trauma or an opportunity. Let's say that the trauma is something like the World War II, or even for some wars in a country, the First World War, or the situation in South Africa. In the era of the boxers and whatever. So, or even the civic war in Greece or in the States or in every actual country. Anyway, COVID, it would, to my opinion, wouldn't be a trauma. Maybe it's an opportunity for some things like changing of social and individual habits. We don't need COVID to have health measures to wash our hands, but anyway, it might be an opportunity for it. Also, it might be an opportunity for rational choice and organization to decentralize decision making and planning, for deliberation, or use IT tools like we have the experience to use IT tools in teaching and learning across universities, but we will see. So we need pre and post-COVID research to see if it would be a trauma, what are the political consequences, social and educational, economical consequences. Anyway, to my opinion, it is not a world war, and also we will see about the research on COVID and on effect of COVID. Like the Zeman, we have also in the Aristotle University, together with the Ministry of Interior of Greece and also two other universities in Greece, we have the Observatory for Democracy in Balkan, Black Sea, and Eastern Mediterranean. As you may recall, in the past we say in the frame of Zeman that it would be a very interesting or a very good thing if we can include colleagues from the Balkans, and we are in this process to open the whole discussion. I'm not saying anything about this, and let me say something about the model as mentioned for the analysis. We are trying to investigate associations between government's response measures and data, the actual data, that means positivity rate, mortality rate, testing rate. And I choose Greece and Cyprus because we are in Cyprus and I'm from Greece. But we have a lot of data for other countries like Romania, also Bulgaria, Serbia, Albania, countries in the Balkan area. And also we may continue having some comparative research on countries, but for the moment we have, I will present the results from Greece, because I'm from Greece, and for Cyprus because we are in Cyprus. So we focus on the period from the detection of the first case in Greece it was in 26th of February 2020 till the end of, let's say, the end of 2021, the February 2022. We based the analysis on the analysis of by using correspondence analysis method on a fuzzy-coded communities table, and it is followed by an hierarchical cluster analysis on the factor scores. The factors, we get the factors from the correspondence, and we analyze the scores using the hierarchical cluster analysis. And our idea is that results reveal the distinct time periods during which interesting interaction took place between control measures and incident data. We use data, we get the data for the government response, the measures from government using the Oxford tracker, because it is a well-known application and tracker about the response measures from government. And we combined with the self-collected data for Greece and also for the data by the World Health Organization for the pandemic data for Cyprus. The tracker, if you are familiar with it, I don't know if you are familiar with the government response tracker, but let me say that it is based on 23 indicators. There are two groups of indicators mainly. The one consider measures about containment and closure. One for health systems. The one is the first group of indicators refers to, let's say, collective level policies and measures. And the second one for the individual level, like testing, vaccination, and so on, although the first refers to the closures and restrictions in mobility, and a number of people attending something. If you are interested in, you can see through Oxford Tracker the exact measures and the codification. And as I said, it is 8 for collective level indicators. We use 8 of them, and we get a total score from 0 to 16. And for the individual level indicators, we use 6 of them, and also we get a total indicator from 0 to 10. And for the self-collected or the data from the World Health Organization, with the first positive cases, number of deaths related to COVID, number of tests and vaccinations and total vaccination, we use 3 indicators: the number of cases divided by number of tests, the positivity index, that is the positivity index, the mortality index, number of deaths according to cases, and the testing index, number of tests according to people. We didn't use the vaccination, the number of vaccinations, because this study runs from the beginning of COVID. The beginning of COVID till end of, as I said, beginning of 2022, but vaccination starts at January 21, so we didn't have a lot of interaction between vaccination and we will use it in next step. So we use a 4-step analysis model. In the first step, we transform the quantitative variables, positivity, mortality rate, and testing rate, to ordinal variables. In the second step, we get the 5 ordinal variables, the recorded variables, and the ordinal scores, the scores I have mentioned, in the three categories each. Then, if we transform the 3 quantity variables in the ordinal variables, and we get a generalized 0-1 fuzzy-coded matrix for each variable. Let me say that in the third step, through correspondence analysis, the application of correspondence analysis on this table, we get as I said, the factors and also the scores for factors for the 15 variables and also for the 19 and 94, which we use as data, as cases. we have 94 weeks, and for each week we we, we record the two set of measures according to outcome tracker and the three variables as mentioned, the indicators. So we have 15 variables. Each variable is recorded in 3-level. In a 3-level sim, and we have 94 rows. So in the final step, we use hierarchical Gaussian analysis in order to see groups of variable levels and also groups of time period. Let me skip the graphs. You see the dendrograms for Greece and Cyprus, according to method that I'm saying. So for Greece, we have 4 significant axes explaining something like 75% of the total inertia, and as we may see, low and moderate mortality rate and high factor testing rate define a pole and refer to the most significant axis, which is opposed to average and high levels of individual measures. That means that if we have low and moderate mortality rates and high testing rates, this is the opposite of the average and high levels of individual measures, that is measures point or refer to the individual and not collective to a collective to the society. We refer to the individual and not to the society as a whole. On the second axis, the low positive rate and the average level of collective measures, it is opposite to the average and high positive rate and high levels of collective measures. That is, if we have low positive rate and average level, it is connected with average level of collective measures, and average and high positive rate is related to high levels of collective measures, that is lockdowns and so on. And it is simple as that, as we may say. It is something logical. If we have a low positive rate, then we don't need very strict collective measures. And if we have high positivity rate, we will need strong measures. Let me just say a few words about Cyprus also. We also have 4 significant axes explaining 80% of the total inertia. We described, as I say, the total, the main contrast between group of categories. So in Cyprus, low test rates and low and average levels of collective measures and high levels of individual measures define a pole. Here is a difference between Greece and Cyprus. As you see, if we have low test rate and we have low and average levels of collective measures, but high levels of individual measures. And it is opposed to the high test rate, high level of collective measures, and low and average levels of individual measures. Go to the final result that if we use the hierarchical cluster analysis to organize and to see what is the time, time period, how we can divide time periods according to these variables we mentioned. We see that in Greece, the first cluster, it is combined data from March 22 till summer of 22. The second one from April, May, and May to 22, and the third cluster, some months of 22 and 21. And there are also four more clusters. And let me say that for Cyprus, we have, through the analysis, we get 7 clusters, but in 4 categories. The first, it is from the end of June, from the beginning till June 22. The second cluster from January to December 21. The third cluster March 22 to October and June 21. The fourth cluster marks the period from October 22 to February 21 and March 22. And the fifth to the period of December 21 to March 20. I'm sure it is a little bit difficult to explain in a few minutes all this thing. You may read it and we will talk about it later on. But anyway, just a few words on the results. We can argue that if we talk about measures and data about COVID, we always say that is the chicken and egg dilemma, because collective and individual measures affect daily incidence data, or it is the vice versa, that is the incidence data affect the measures, collective and individual measures. We conclude that in fact, the two should be perceived as working in conjunction and not dependently from one another, as it is logical. For the case of Greece, we see that lower positivity rate is accompanied by average level of measures from government at both individual and collective level, and higher positivity rates accompanied by higher level of measures, as it is logical. And regards to mortality rate, we observe that high mortality involves higher level of collective measures and average level of individual measures, whereas average level of collective are associated with higher mortality rate. There is some difference between Greece and Cyprus. In Cyprus, we see that lower positivity rates are combined by average to high level collective measures from government and at the collective level, and higher positivity rates are combined by low to average level of collective measures as a response. So it is evidence that when it comes to decision making in crisis situation, systematic collection, analysis, and use of data is linked to more effective government response overall. Therefore, evidence evidence-based policy making should be linked to crisis. This is a general, let me say, phrase used in every situation. Evidence-based policy making should be linked to crisis management, not evidence, but otherwise policy making situations. So evidence-based policy making should be linked to crisis management. We present a first attempt to capture an ongoing phenomenon, and therefore it is crucial that collection analysis data will be complemented until the end of the phenomenon, and we hope that it will be soon. I don't know if it will be by the end of this June, but I suppose it will. Thank you, and I'm sorry for the technical things. So, as I may once again I say I'm very sorry about this. The next time if we use it again, hoping we will. Anyway, we will do it better. We will use another platform. So, are there any questions? Are there any comments about the? We had 4 different interesting papers. The one about taxes on population exposure to pollution. The other one about the role of universities on regional innovation. The other one about gaps in environmental protection for Black Sea and Eastern Mediterranean region, and the one about COVID and model analysis of measure data records. So it's, there are a lot of different situations, but I might say that we see that data and evidence-based measures will be used as a strategic tool for innovation and for everything, for decision making. This is my idea. Anyway, I don't know if can can somebody write something like in the chat, something like a question, or even try to write them. Everybody see my I write hello in the chat.
No, we can't. We can't see what.
So, if there is any question to
No, it was very interesting. The paper about COVID was really interesting. It's difficult to say because it's very much information regarding.
Yes.
And also many different topics that have been.
Yes, I mean, anyway, it's a good thing that we have an interest on environmental taxes on the population exposure to pollution. on environmental protection, on the role of universities on regional innovation, about quality, and also about the pandemic and the relationship between preventive measures, government preventive measures, and health apparatus. So it's actually too many different areas. But anyway, I think the decision making is the common thing, and also probably the way people think about the situation. But anyway, we will have the chance to talk about all these things in the near future, I suppose. So, does anybody like to say something, or should we close the session and continue?
In closing, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to present the paper, and also it was very interesting because I could see many topics that are not are not in my research, or I wasn't aware of their importance, such as the one about universities. And I think that this is a great thing because we can all become more familiar with many other subjects of academic research. Thank you, and this is
Thank
all
you,
I have to say.
Stefan. Thank you, Alexandra. Thank you, Leonidi, and all the audience, all the other people that.
Thank you.
And I hope next time we will be in person you know, the next German conference will be in Lebanon. So this is next year. Always there is an opportunity to see some places. So thank you all. Have a nice weekend.
Thank you, and also a nice weekend and good evening.
Thank you, and take care, everyone. Be well.
Bye.
Thank you.